In the history of computing, few companies burned as bright or as fast as Silicon Graphics. For a stretch of 2 decades, this was the company that powered the visual imagination of Hollywood, the Pentagon, and Silicon Valley itself. Its machines rendered dinosaurs that felt alive, submarines that hunted for Red October, and virtual worlds that seemed impossible for their time. This is the story of Silicon Graphics, a company that helped invent the modern visual computing industry, rose to dizzying heights, and then collapsed almost as quickly as it climbed. The story begins at Stanford University in the early 1980s with a professor named Jim Clark. Clark had been working on a specialized computer chip called the Geometry Engine, a piece of hardware designed to make the complex math behind 3D graphics run drastically faster than software alone ever could. Clark realized this breakthrough could be the foundation of an entirely new kind of computer, one built specifically for visualizing three-dimensional worlds. In 1982, he left academia and founded Silicon Graphics, Incorporated, alongside a small team of fellow Stanford researchers and engineers who believed graphics, not just raw computation, was the future of computing. Silicon Graphics' earliest products were high-end workstations aimed at engineers and scientists who needed to visualize complex data, things like molecular structures, aircraft designs, and geological models. These machines were expensive, often costing tens of thousands of dollars, but they offered something no competitor could match: real-time 3D rendering. Customers in aerospace, oil exploration, and academic research snapped them up. By the mid-1980s, SGI had carved out a lucrative niche as the company you turned to when ordinary computers simply couldn't visualize your problem fast enough. Everything changed when the entertainment industry discovered what SGI machines could do. In 1989, visual effects artists used Silicon Graphics technology to help create the shimmering water creature in the abyss. Then in 1991, SGI hardware helped bring the liquid metal T-1000 to life in Terminator 2, Judgment Day, a special effects moment that stunned audiences and rewired what filmmakers thought was possible. The crown jewel came in 1993, when Silicon Graphics workstations were used to generate the photorealistic dinosaurs of Jurassic Park. That single film cemented SGI's reputation as the essential engine behind the coming digital revolution in cinema. Through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Silicon Graphics became one of Silicon Valley's most celebrated companies. Its sleek, futuristic campus in Mountain View, complete with a giant slide and an atmosphere borrowed from science fiction films, reflected the company's self-image as the maker of tomorrow's technology today. SGI's machines found their way into NASA research labs, into the Department of Defense, into video game arcades running cutting-edge graphics hardware, and eventually into the development of the Nintendo 64 console. Revenue climbed year after year, and by the mid-1990s the company was worth billions, a Wall Street darling as much as a Hollywood favorite. SGI's influence stretched even into the birth of the Internet's visual culture. In 1997, the company introduced the O2 workstation and continued refining its Octane and Onyx systems, machines so powerful they were used to design submarines, simulate nuclear tests, and render special effects for blockbuster after blockbuster. Even the friendly, gradient-colored television test pattern known to some as the SGI logo screen became a quiet piece of pop culture. For a moment, having an SGI machine humming in your studio was a status symbol as much as a tool, a signal that you were working at the absolute frontier of digital creation. But the very technology that made Silicon Graphics special was also becoming its greatest vulnerability. Throughout the 1990s, ordinary personal computers were improving at a blistering pace, and graphics chips designed for consumer machines were rapidly closing the gap with SGI's specialized, expensive hardware. Companies like Nvidia and ATI began producing 3D graphics cards for a fraction of the cost of an SGI workstation. Meanwhile, Microsoft's Windows NT was becoming a viable, cheaper alternative to SGI's proprietary IRIX operating system. The moat that had protected Silicon Graphics for over a decade was quietly draining away. Silicon Graphics' leadership struggled to respond. The company made a costly bet by acquiring the supercomputer maker Cray Research in 1996, a deal meant to expand its high-performance computing business but one that added debt and complexity rather than fresh momentum. At the same time, SGI was slow to fully embrace the Windows and Intel ecosystem that was rapidly becoming the industry standard, clinging instead to its proprietary MIPS processors and IRIX software even as the market shifted beneath its feet. Leadership changes came in rapid succession, with a series of CEOs each attempting a turnaround that never quite arrived. As the 1990s ended, Silicon Graphics' financial troubles deepened. Revenue that had once seemed unstoppable began to shrink year after year as customers migrated to cheaper alternatives. The company sold off Cray Research in 2000, just 4 years after buying it, a clear admission that the acquisition had failed to deliver. When the dot-com bubble burst in the early 2000s, it hit the technology sector broadly, but Silicon Graphics was especially exposed, already weakened and now facing a market with far less appetite for expensive specialized hardware. The decline that followed was steep and unforgiving. Silicon Graphics filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in 2006, emerged briefly in a restructured form, but never regained its former stature. In 2009, the company filed for bankruptcy a second time, and its remaining assets were sold to Rackable Systems, which then adopted the Silicon Graphics name for a time before that too eventually faded from the market. The company that once defined the cutting edge of visual computing had, within a decade, gone from a multi-billion-dollar Silicon Valley icon to a footnote sold off in pieces. Yet Silicon Graphics' influence never really disappeared. Its OpenGL graphics standard, developed in the early 1990s, became the foundation for 3D graphics programming across the entire industry, still used in various forms today. The generation of engineers, filmmakers, and researchers trained on SGI hardware went on to shape companies like Pixar, NVIDIA, and Netscape. Jim Clark himself went on to co-found Netscape, helping ignite the commercial internet boom. In many ways, the DNA of Silicon Graphics lives on in every smartphone, every video game, and every visual effect that renders a three-dimensional world before our eyes. Silicon Graphics' story is ultimately a Silicon Valley parable about innovation, hubris, and the relentless pace of technological change. A company built on brilliant, specialized hardware helped invent an entire visual language for computing, only to be undone by the very forces of commoditization and competition it had helped set in motion. Today, when audiences marvel at a photorealistic film or lose themselves in a video game world, they are witnessing the distant echo of a company that dared to imagine computers could show us anything we could dream, and for a shining moment proved it.